It has been a strange start to Wimbledon, what with the flying ants and players throwing coins in the general direction of umpires. We got a live report from the All England Club on the way. Plus, we're going to handicap some of the trade scenarios swirling around Melo. But first, some news on why Chauncey Billups decided not to take the Cavs front office job. And for that, we got Chris Haynes and the undefeated Mark Spears, who have an article up on ESPN.com about all this. And Chris joins us now. What were you able to find out, Chris, about why the negotiations broke down?
Well, league sources told myself and Mark Spears that the initial offer on the table for Chauncey Billups to take over the Cavaliers' president of basketball operations position was 1.5. Then it was boosted up to $2 million annually. But for proper context, for most of the president of basketball operations positions, the starting rate annually is around $4 million. So that was about a $2 million drop-off if Chauncey Billups were to take on that position. And there were other factors that led to Chauncey, not accepting it. He spoke with Mark Spears about that last week. We tried to reach out to Billups regarding this story, and he declined to comment on it. So he was not used as a source in this. And we wish we would have been able to talk with him about it. But it was just interesting to find out how much or how little Dan Gilbert, the Cavaliers owner, was willing to fork out for their top leader of front office basketball operations. Yeah, a lowball offer there. But is that kind of what David Griffin was making as well in the role? Is it Dan Gilbert just sort of pays that for the GM position? Yes, David Griffin was making a little bit under $2 million. And you have to remember, that was as the role of GM. President of basketball operations, that's a higher title. Griffin was seeking that title along with more power within the organization. So it's well known that the Cavaliers, Cleveland, Dan Gilbert does not fork over top dollar for the head office of the front office. So it was, like I said, it was a little bit interesting to find out those were the numbers offered to Chauncey, because I know a lot of people throwing out there, well, Chauncey had no basketball experience, but look, Rob Pelinka had no front office basketball experience. He's making about $5 million annually. And then Phil Jackson, of course. So it was clearly a low ball offer. But Chauncey Billups, like I said, there was other factors that played into, that came into play. And certainly, I know he loves his ESPN job here. So, it was just an unfortunate situation, because I think most people feel like he's going to be a great executive in this league. Yeah, very highly thought of in the NBA. You talked about other factors, maybe LeBron and his contract could be a factor for some people. He's only got one more year remaining on his deal with the Cavs. How does that play into all of this? Well, I was told that, and Mark Spears as well. He was told, matter of fact, he told Mark Spears last week that he did not speak to LeBron James at all during that process. LeBron James' status as a Cavalier moving forward past next season did not play a factor at all in his decision. Look, to be able to come on and take on, to be the leadership of the basketball front office within the NBA is a privilege and an honor. And so Billups looked at from that standpoint, not who was necessarily on the roster right now. But, they didn't have any conversations. That's just the truth of the matter. All right, Chris Haynes giving us some insight into what went down between Chauncey Billups and Dan Gilbert for that job as the president of basketball operations. Again, a piece up on ESPN.com right now about that. Thank you, Chris. Let's bring in our Cavs reporter now, Dave McMenamin. Dave, how would you describe the state of the Cavaliers front office to date?
David, there's a bit of disarray, but you had to give credits to the guys who have been left over once the team parted ways with David Griffin. Kobe Altman, the assistant GM, who's really been acting as the interim GM. I spoke to a prominent agent last week, and I said, who are you dealing with when you make calls to the Cavs? He said, certainly Kobe Altman and Dan Gilbert. And then you have to give credit to Mike Gansey, who was the D-League, now G-League, Executive of the Year with the Canton Charge. He kind of got a call up, and now he's sitting in the big seat right alongside Kobe Altman. And, you know, I spoke to some people in the Cavs front office this week, and the mentality is just put our head down, try to do good work. We'll worry about titles, we'll worry about raises and everything of the sort afterwards. But right now there's a task to do, and that's trying to make the Cavs good enough to compete with the Golden State Warriors better than they did in this year's NBA Finals.
We've heard you mention Kobe Altman a lot. Why not just promote him and make him the general manager?
One source described what's going on right now as kind of an interview, you know, on the fly, an extended interview. He might not actually sit down and hand his resume over to Dan Gilbert and talk about his qualifications. The proof is in the pudding, and how he's conducted himself certainly has impressed people within the organization I've spoken to. And again, his mentality, the mentality actually of the entire front office group that is remaining, is not licking their wounds. It's not, you know, acting in a state of shock, because it was kind of jarring to go through this process, as Chris Haynes just laid out. You know, David Griffin gets let go. The top candidate who had been identified by Dan Gilbert tells the franchise no thanks. Meanwhile, there's still calls being made. There's still long hours being put in. And Kobe Altman, even though he's only 34 years old, I think has shown a level of maturity and savviness in this role thus far.
Hey, is this an attractive position? I mean, I don't know what Dan Gilbert's like to work for, but it doesn't seem like there's this slew of names coming up. Is it an attractive position for guys around the league?
Listen, there's only 30 of these jobs in the NBA. There are a slew of people, I should say, out there in the sport that would love a shot at a team that already has 3 straight NBA Finals appearances under its belt, and at least in the short term is built to compete for a championship. But if you are someone like Chauncey Billups, who's already had 15-plus year NBA career, you're sitting on a lot of money as long as you took care of it and invested it well. Why take this risk? You know, Chauncey Billups was going to have other opportunities. He interviewed with the Atlanta Hawks before he interviewed with the Cleveland Cavaliers, and he also has a paying gig at ESPN right now. There are going to be people out there that, you know, either it's a younger person like Kobe Altman, who they're champing at the bit for a chance to jump at that job, or perhaps someone trying to get back in the game. I mean, there are some prominent guys out there right now, Mitch Kupchak, Sam Hinkie. I think basketball's in their blood, and that could perhaps be the next step for the Cavs. But right now, I don't see any sort of urgency from the organization to find a replacement for Chauncey. It's using the guys that they have in place and trusting guys like Mike Yancey and Kobe Altman. But the bigger question to me is Dan Gilbert now positioning himself to be a Jerry Jones-type owner moving forward?
Well, that would be interesting. Meanwhile, the Cavs have been awfully quiet this offseason. I know they don't have a lot of cap space. Are there any remaining names on the market that Cleveland could target?
Yeah, so here's some names for you, David. I mean, they have the mid-level exception worth about $5.2 million. Now, the market is starting to dry up, so perhaps these names I'm going to mention to you, they could go after. You got a guy like Thabo Sefolosha from the Atlanta Hawks. The Cavs want to add two-way players, so Sefolosha is certainly a 3-and-D guy. C.J. Miles from the Indiana Pacers. Vince Carter, now he's up there. He's over 40 years old, but again, this is what they had to look at in terms of veteran minimum. And then maybe even another guy from the Indiana Pacers, Monte Ellis, who was waived today. There's some instant scoring off the bench, and we saw how poorly the Cavs bench played in the finals when the Warriors were bringing in waves of guys who just kept putting it on the Cavs. Perhaps there's a flyer that could be taken on Monte, even though Monte will start the season under a suspension for substance use.
All right. Interesting times for the Cleveland Cavaliers. Our Cavs reporter Dave McMenamin filling us in on all of that. Two quarterbacks in the news for different reasons. Derek Carr is getting paid, while Dak Prescott may be getting into trouble. Darren Ravel with the latest there. It's all Clover now. Gordon Hayward is going to be a Celtic, but the C's aren't done making moves. Remote Sports business reporter Darren Ravel. It's interesting, Darren, how the Raiders' move to Las Vegas actually is going to benefit Carr financially. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so basically, David, if you look at California's state income tax, that's 13.3% on top of what you're paying federally. And so that's the largest state in the nation as far as the biggest state income tax. And then you're going to Nevada, which was one of those states that have zero state income tax. And obviously, that's going to be a big savings. So the Raiders kind of played it in that while they're giving him less dollars, he's actually going to net more as long as they get to Nevada. So say they get to Nevada in 2019, they're giving him something like $20 million in that deal, and he's going to make more than what they're giving him the year before in California, $22.5 million. But because he has to pay that California state tax, he's going to be netting more off $2.5 million less the next year, again, as long as they get to Nevada in 2019.
All right, there you go. So you move one state over and you save a bundle on taxes there, and good for Derek Carr as he continues to move forward. All right, so we got another quarterback in the news, and that is Dak Prescott being accused of using a machine to sign his autographs. What more can you tell us about this?
So the way this went down was there was a redemption card, and Dak actually signed these, or was given these things to sign. And essentially what happened was a couple people who had gotten these then gave it to Beckett Grading Services to grade these cards to say, okay, let's put these in cases and say this is an authentic Dak Prescott autograph. Unfortunately, the folks at Beckett then came in and said, well, we're going to refuse these because we don't think these are real. We think that these were done by a machine. We think these were done by essentially auto pen, and Dak didn't really sign these. So they rejected them, and that started this whole controversy back to Panini, the company that asked him to sign them. What happened here? And we have, 24 hours later, gotten no response from Panini, the card company. We've gotten no response from Dak Prescott, nor his marketing agent or his regular agent, as to what happened. All we know is Panini sent the cards. They got the cards back. The people who got these cards sent their signed cards in, and the people who authenticate the autographs said these autographs are no good. So obviously, this is a shot at the industry, and until we hear from Dak and Panini, we kind of don't know what's going on here.
Let me break this down. Is the finger pointed specifically at Dak, or could someone else be at fault here if indeed these charges are true?
Well, the way it works is they send the marketing agent the cards. The marketing agent then presumably has the player sign them. Now, could it be possible that the marketing agent or some agent got these cards, used the auto pen, thought it was a good idea, and then sent it back? Yeah, possibly, but Panini, the card company, in each time they get a shipment, they put in that shipment a paper that is essentially an affidavit saying, I, Dak Prescott, signed these, and then it is witnessed. So, again, somehow it falls under Dak here, but I guess we can say there's a possibility that maybe he had no idea about this. But Beckett Grading Services have put their name on the line to say, we do believe these are indeed faked. They are done by a machine. They are not done by hand. And so at least, listen, those guys do this for a business, and they're willing to say they're not real. And until we hear from Dak or his agents, we really don't know what the story is. But again, it's a shot at the memorabilia industry.
Oh, real quickly, what kind of trouble could Dak Prescott get in over this?
Well, who knows? I mean, the idea that there's an affidavit signed, and again, if you assume that these are not real, this constitutes fraud. I mean, you're saying you signed these presumably, and then you potentially didn't. So, I mean, this could go up to kind of a criminal level. It does constitute fraud if you say you did something and you essentially didn't. But I think there's a couple more details that are going to have to be filled in here. And right now, we're just relying on the parties involved to share what they know about the situation.
All right, stay tuned for this. Darren Ravel giving us the very latest here on the business of sports. We got much more coming up, including what moves the Celtics may be making in the future. Gordon Hayward is going to be a Celtic, but there's still unfinished business. And for that, we bring in our Ramona Shelburne, who has a story up on ESPN.com right now. All right, so plain and simple, what do the Celtics need to do to get his max contract under the cap here, Ramona?
Well, you know what they say about all good plans, right? Everybody assumed the salary cap was going to be one thing, but it was just a little bit short of where it was. And the Celtics have this complicated series of moves that they have to do, and it started by them renouncing the rights to Kelly Olynyk, but they have to renounce rights to 3 or 4 other players, then trade Terry Rozier, then they have so many moves they have to make just to get close to the max, and they still end up $300,000 short of being able to give Gordon Hayward his max. And so that means that they have been calling around the league over the past couple of days, ever since he sent word that he was going to go to Boston, saying, we've got to trade either Jay Crowder, Marcus Smart, or Avery Bradley, because those salaries are the ones that will help them get enough money to sign Gordon Hayward to his full max. Now, Gordon Hayward, of course, could take just a little haircut, could take $300,000 less and make this easy, but he sent word that he's not going to do that. He wants the full max. That's what he agreed upon. And so the Celtics have been calling every team in the league, finding out the best return they can get for those three players. That doesn't mean they're going to trade all 3. Probably they only really need to trade one of them. But the rest of the league now is in position to profit off of Boston's sort of misfortune, because the salary cap did not rise as much as expected.
Yeah, and all 3 of those guys, valuable pieces. Certainly Avery Bradley and Jay Crowder, and you got Marcus Smart, who would be coming off the bench. How might this affect the Utah Jazz, if in any way?
Well, that's a good question, because the Jazz are calling Boston saying, hey, listen, you know, we would rather get something for Gordon Hayward than lose him altogether for nothing. And so the Jazz have tried to engage the Celtics on sign and trade conversations for Jay Crowder. Now, Jay Crowder, of the 3 players I mentioned, is probably the odd man out, because Gordon Hayward plays small forward. Jason Tatum plays small forward. That's the guy they just drafted number 3 overall. The guy they drafted 3rd overall last year, he's a small forward as well. Obviously, Jaylen Brown, small forward. So Jay Crowder is probably the odd man out there. And the Jazz are saying, you know, if we can do a sign and trade for Gordon Hayward, send back Jay Crowder, that would solve all of your problems, and it'd be a nice farewell gift to the fans in Utah and to the organization in Utah that you wrote so eloquently about in that letter to the Players Tribune that you care so much about. Now, the Celtics, of course, say, well, maybe we can get something more for Jay Crowder than just salary cap relief, than just being able to make this trade here. And so that's the way this plays out as we go forward. If Boston gets something they like for either Jay Crowder or Marcus Smart or Avery Bradley, and that's going to take a lot, obviously those are key rotational players, then I think they make one of those deals and say, sorry, Utah, we're not going to do that sign and trade.
All right. So it's not done yet. We'll see how that all plays out. Let's go to West. Nick Young moving north to the Warriors. I know you've covered Nick for a long time. You surprised he was recruited by the Warriors and welcomed with such open arms?
You know, I guess initially I was. I've covered Nick since high school, so you see this open arm picture. Like, I love that Kevin Durant tweeted this and forgot that he actually missed the shot, right? But Nick actually had a lot of suitors. I mean, New Orleans Pelicans were after him. The San Antonio Spurs had some interest. There's a lot of teams that are actually after Nick Young because of the way he shoots the ball, and also, quite frankly, because of the year he had playing for Luke Walton with the Lakers last year. I mean, he was a player last year where you were surprised that he was even on the team. There was talk they might waive him, that he might not even be brought back. 1, he makes the team. 2, he ends up starting and has a career year for Luke Walton. So it's not all that surprising that Alvin Gentry, the coach of the Pelicans, really wanted to get him for that system, believing he would have so many open shots playing with Boogie and Anthony Davis. But the Golden State Warriors saw the same thing and said, you know, Luke, do you think he would fit in this kind of culture? And I spoke to Nick throughout his recruiting process, and he said, you know, the chance to win, the chance to change his reputation, the chance to be this year's JaVale McGee was too much to pass up, and that's why he's a Warrior today. All
right. You mentioned JaVale McGee, so I'm going to go there. The Clippers met with McGee. They also met with Derrick Rose yesterday. What do we know about that, Ramona?
Well, I think both. You know, I don't see either of those guys signing with the Clippers. I think JaVale is probably going back to the Warriors, but he wants to see what else is out there for him and what kind of money other teams are going to pay him. So he's doing what a lot of free agents right now are doing, is trying to set their own market and not just return to their teams on minimum deals. Derrick Rose is really interesting because in New York, I think that the Knicks obviously were sitting back and trying to decide if they wanted to make a big offer to Dion Waiters. Well, now that Dion Waiters goes back to Miami, The Knicks then are in a position where they could bring back Derrick Rose, and I know there had been some interest in that beforehand at the right number. The Knicks obviously are going young. They don't want to take back older players. They don't want to take back players that are going to have long-term contract encumbrance. That they want to go. That was the plan before Phil Jackson was fired. I think it's still the plan now. And Derrick Rose is that veteran point guard who can mentor their rookie point guard. They drafted 8th overall. And I think the path now is there for him to return. He also, though, has interest from the Lakers, obviously the Clippers. He met with them, and some other teams around the league. But Dion Waiters taking that money from Miami made that money in New York available for Derrick Rose.
Very interesting. Domino's still falling in the NBA. Ramona Shelburne.
That's how it works.
It's still going. It's still clicking along pretty good. Ramona here with us, giving us some thoughts on what's happening. And we continue on with the NBA. Right now on ESPN.com, Ian Begley has an article on trade scenarios that could lead to how Carmelo Anthony can escape the Knicks. Escape. Get out of town. And we bring in Ian and Bobby Marks, who's worked on this as well. All right, so Ian, we'll start with you. Where do we stand in the Knicks-Melo saga as far as him being traded?
Members of the Knicks organization still feel that the best route for them going forward is to trade Carmelo. You know, I'm told that talks with the Knicks and other teams and potentially third teams have been on and off recently, but the goal among most in that Knicks organization right now is to continue to pursue a Carmelo trade, a deal that is not easy to pull off, as Bobby can tell you.
Well, you're right, Ian. It's going to be really difficult. I think where you look at his contract right now, $26 million and $27 million owed. We haven't even talked about that 8.1 trade kicker, and I think it depends on if Carmelo Anthony wants to expand the list of teams right now. We talked about Cleveland. We talked about Houston, but, Ian, I talked to 3 teams, and all 3 teams told me that if Carmelo Anthony was on the open market right now, they would not sign him to the price tag he is currently under.
So he's not basically worth the money at this point in his career. All right, so as you guys mentioned, Houston and Cleveland are the 2 places that Melo has basically gone on record as saying he'd be willing to go there and waive his no-trade clause. Ian, lay it out for me. How would a trade with the Rockets work?
You know, Ryan Anderson is the biggest piece for Houston, and the Knicks and the Rockets had talked about a deal involving Ryan Anderson, and as of late last week, the Knicks did not have interest in bringing Ryan back, and that's why you would probably have to bring in a third team here, a third team that would take Ryan Anderson from the Rockets, and that would allow, you know, Trevor Ariza and some of the Rockets' non-guaranteed contracts to be sent to New York for Carmelo. You know, Trevor Ariza entering the final year of his current contract, so that would open up cap space for the Knicks next summer, but they wouldn't get any significant pieces that help them now in return in that iteration of the deal.
That's what makes this whole thing so difficult for the Knicks to pull off a trade. What about, Bobby, for the Cavs? A potential trade with Cleveland, how would that have to work?
Well, we've heard the name Kevin Love, and we can probably go down that road if both sides want to. I just don't see where it's a fit for New York. If you look at how their roster is, are we willing to put Kristaps Porzingis at the 5, and now you put Kevin Love at the 4? What do you do with Joakim Noah and Willie Hernan-Gomez? And then when you look at Cleveland there, is it the LeBron James era at power forward? And I just find it difficult for both teams kind of matching up, and that's why we probably need to get a third team involved. And as you've seen, this market is drying up right now. There are not a lot of teams that are in need of a power forward. One team that might is Atlanta, but new general manager Travis Schlenk has certainly identified that team is certainly in a rebuild.
All right, so if it sounds like trades are hard to do with Carmelo Anthony and his contract, what other options would there be here, Ian?
You know, there's always the buyout option here, and that's something that the Knicks, you know, to date have been reluctant to discuss with Carmelo's people. You know, they're pretty adamant that they want to get assets back in any Carmelo Anthony transaction. They've been down the road of letting high-salary players go for nothing in the past, with Amari Stoudemire most recently They don't want to do that again. Phil Jackson didn't want to do that again. I don't think Steve Mills wants to go that route. But they could change course. And if they did, if they did agree to a buyout with Anthony, and let's say he took some less money than the $54 million he is owed, the Knicks could stretch that out across 5 seasons, and it would free up some salary cap space for the Knicks in the next 2 summers, but it would also keep a lot of money on the Knicks' books in the 3 summers after that, after they would have gotten out of Carmelo Anthony's deal had they not done the buyout.
All right, so the Knicks are right now kind of stuck a little bit with Carmelo Anthony. We'll see if there's any movement moving forward. We got Ian Begley and Bobby Marks on the story here on Coast to Coast.